Okay, so the Black Myth Wukong saga continues. It's still not out on Xbox Series consoles. We still don't really understand why. Is it a console exclusive to PlayStation? That is, there have been numerous rumblings about this. We've actually heard that story ourselves. Is there actually issues with the concept of the game being ported to Xbox because of the need to produce an Xbox Series S version, which I believe Microsoft ruled out back in the day? Oliver, new evidence has emerged that does suggest that maybe the Xbox Series S is a reason, right?
Yes, and I think this always makes a lot more sense here because the way the developers were talking about the game initially didn't really suggest they had a PlayStation exclusive deal. In particular, when they were talking about it, they were talking about it in a bit more of an open fashion than you typically see with exclusivity deals. Usually when exclusivity deals are arranged, there is kind of like some communication to the press that this is an exclusivity deal in some form, and they don't want to talk about other platforms at all. They say they defer that question. So in this case, I think it was evident through some public statements. Then, of course, there was this messaging from Microsoft that was a bit contradictory, where they said we don't comment on exclusivity deals from other partners. So that was certainly very confusing here. But yeah, I mean, basically they're implying here through their statement that 10 gigabytes of memory is too little, in particular because they don't have console optimization experience. And that makes sense. I mean, it's just a very short snippet of what he's saying here. But that does make sense to me because the Chinese game market is mostly oriented around PCs, and the developers seem to approach Wukong from more of a PC first perspective. And they're speaking to maybe they don't have console optimization experience in that team there. That would be very helpful in translating a game to a Series S. But I do think if they had approached maybe this project with the Series S in mind from the outset, which it seems like a lot of developers are doing, maybe they would have had an easier go of it because, there are a lot of other UE5 games that are shipping this generation, almost all of them, on consoles as well as PCs. And obviously in this day and age, that implies shipping on Series S as well. And, you can do a lot of stuff with UE5. You can even kind of mangle the visual presentation of your game, like we saw with the Talos Principle 2, where they just cut out Lumen entirely from the Series S version, which maybe didn't produce a great visual result. But could they do something here with a non-Lumen lighting path? Could they do something like that? Who knows? So yeah, I do think this is not necessarily the biggest indictment of the hardware on the Series S, though it isn't very positive either necessarily. If people are going to use this for console wars purposes, which I wouldn't advise, obviously, but I'd suggest it's a combination of the hardware and maybe some developer, the way they approach this project, possibly some inexperience, elements like that. I think explain this, and I do hope that once we do see it, that there will be a good Series S version in hand, because I do expect, based on this comment, that they are continuing to work away on it and that they are going to ship an Xbox Series version of this game at some point, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I looked at Black Myth Wukong running on a GPU broadly equivalent to the Xbox Series S, it was doable. You could produce a good version of the game. The issue being that GPU had 8 gigs of memory and the PC surrounding it had another 16 gigs of system memory. So in terms of GPU performance, I don't think that's ever really been an issue. But the memory side of things, getting everything into however much memory the Series S has available, that is a lot more of an onerous challenge. And Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but there have been a lot of memory optimizations made to Unreal Engine 5 since 5.0, which is the version that Wukong is using.
Yeah, I mean, Wukong is also the reason why we saw some of the strange, well, I don't say strange, but it just legacy aspects of the version of Unreal Engine 5 it was using. In the stuff the way the foliage rendered, their choice of not using VSMs, which maybe made sense in some way. That would have been another very large video memory cost incurred there. So I think for their version of UE5 that they're using, is at least presented to us in the PC space that we can look at, porting to Series S would be even more challenging than it would be from the latest versions. And, beyond that, they weren't using things like hardware Lumen on PC or on the consoles. The textures were good, but, there was also some weirdness there on the PS5 version originally, where the game also had an awful sharpening filter, but the textures were in an in-between place there on PS5, which didn't make sense. We had yet to see games that shipped on UE5 on consoles that had like degraded textures versus the PC version. It just wasn't the thing that we saw. So it seems like they were struggling with other aspects here. So I don't think they are the be all and end all of people to be talking about, console optimization or something like that. Still, it is another kind of indictment against the Series S, which is the core thing we've heard this entire generation, is that, yeah, you can scale the GPU, CPU is more or less the same, but the amount of memory you have to allocate for a game is actually like one of the core challenges of Series S. And I still think it's gonna be the challenge in the future. I didn't see this game as particularly memory ambitious or something like that based upon its design, but other games, like when I looked at like something like Baldur's Gate, I kind of could understand it a bit more. This game isn't, I mean, it plays a lot. Like you could imagine a game like this with a lot decreased fidelity on a PS2 in terms of its game world design, but obviously all the textures and all the everything else makes it into a next gen game, right? So yeah. That's the way it is. And yeah, I really wish it wouldn't be used for console wars though, because, as Oliver said, like this is just one point of data when we have other points of data of really great UE5 console conversions. Senua is probably really good up there where they made the right choices at the right frame rate. This game could target 30 FPS there. There's a lot of things that could be done and still have it look good.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is the thing that sort of sticks out to me, Alex, is that when we were looking at the PC version of the game, correct me if I'm wrong, but it actually ran just fine on 8GB GPUs.
Yeah, it did.
And yet we had the situation where the textures were degraded on PlayStation 5, which has a lot more video memory available, potentially. So, yes, it does sort of, and indeed all of the other sort of technical choices and issues that we highlighted in Black Myth Wukong on PlayStation 5 did kind of hint at a developer that hadn't really done a major console release before. And some of those issues were kind of addressed in the patch update that you looked at, Oliver.
Yes.
But then again, some of them weren't. So, yeah, there is this sort of sense that, as this post kind of hints at, that, console games just isn't really their thing. They don't have that years of experience of working with consoles, which may have had an impact on this, which is certainly an interesting perspective. The patch, Oliver, was really fascinating. I'm still sort of struggling with the concept of a of a 60 frames per second performance mode using frame generation, meaning that one of the key points of actual performance, input lag, will be lower than the quality mode or the balance mode. That was sort of a bit of an issue that I've never quite got my head around. And it's even using frame generation to get to 60 on PS5 Pro. So there's a lot of technical issues, and it looks as though, it had an impact on PlayStation 5. We still haven't seen Xbox. So, who knows? I guess the concept of the exclusivity deal, I mean, if Wukong suddenly appears 6 months or a year directly after the PlayStation version, then that would kind of like be highly indicative evidence that there was some kind of deal in place. But it does seem to be like just a basic post here from the developer saying, 10 gigs of memory, it was a bit of an issue for us. We don't have the experience to actually make that work, which seems like an eminently plausible explanation. But at the same time, we don't know the nature of any potential exclusivity deal that was with PlayStation. It may have been a case that they helped them to get the game into shape for the PS5 and to get that game out there. Who knows? Any final thoughts, Oliver or Alex, before we crack on?
No, just to say, like Rich said, the PS5 version of Black Myth Wukong is kind of okay-ish, sort of. No,
it's all right.
PS5 Pro is better
especially now.
Yeah, the problem, as I see it, like some problems still remain from launch. Some of the sharpening weirdness has been fixed, and there's a new balanced 40 FPS mode at 120 hertz output. But it still runs at 45 FPS at 60 hertz. There's still frame gen in that 60 FPS mode, even though I think, Rich, you showed off pretty well. It could probably do something in the region of 60 FPS without frame gen, or at least, most of the time getting there with comparable GPUs.
Yeah. The thing about the frame gen thing is it doesn't lock you to 60, which, kind of defeats the point. I'd much rather have an actual 60 FPS running at a lower resolution that leads into upscaling. But obviously they looked at that option and decided not to do it.
It's
which is certainly curious.
Also, there's just some weird FSR targets, the resolutions they're going to don't always make a ton of sense. This generation, I think we've seen developers lean really heavily on FSR, for better or for worse, but I think in this case maybe you could lean into it a bit more to achieve higher frame rates, better visual targets, instead of doing they have one mode, their performance mode just runs at native 1080p, which to me feels very strange in this age of temporal upsampling to do native 1080p instead of for instance trying to do some upscale to 1440p, or even trying to achieve a native non-frame gen performance mode at 1080p with a 67% TSR or FSR upscale. That seems to make a lot more sense to me. So there are just some decisions in there that are non-standard. A lot of decisions that are non-standard. I should say a lot of decisions that aren't kind of keeping with best console practices as we understand them in the year of our Lord 2025 at the moment. So yeah, it's a little weird, understandable, but I would still like to see some of those issues addressed, perhaps through some more post-launch patching here before potentially that Xbox version gets released.
I'm just chuckling at the year of our Lord.
Yeah, DF gets religious.
It's an Alexism that seems to have permeated over the entire team.
I'm so sorry, everyone. Yeah. I also got a big laugh at the comments under our graphics of the year video when I said when we mentioned Rich and I say bless his soul. Everyone's like, "What happened to Rich?" No. Yeah, that's the best.
Still alive and kicking.
He's still here.